Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. Today we're revisiting our story about a Vermont citizen scientist, Wilson Bentley, the man affectionately known as Snowflake. If it's true that no two snowflakes are alike, then Bentley, the man who dedicated his life to photographing snow crystals, as he called them, was truly one of a kind. Using a microscope and a camera, both given to him as gifts from his mother, Bentley designed a way to capture the world's first photographs of snowflakes in minute detail. Despite his efforts and successes, he was left out in the cold by the majority of the scientific community. Across the Fence's Ben Willis shares the life and story of Snowflake Bentley, from farmer to photographer to celebrity scientist.
Today, it may be hard to imagine a time when Vermonters did not celebrate a coming snowstorm and its promise of adventure. But in 1885, the year Wilson Bentley successfully took the world's first detailed photo of a snow crystal, there were likely few who were as enamored with winter weather as Bentley.
There was no great fanfare when Wilson Bentley captured his first image of a snowflake. In fact, for the next 13 years, as Wilson captured hundreds more images, it seems he chose not to share his photographs with the world. To understand why, we are at the Old Red Mill, home to the Jericho Historical Society, which features an exhibit dedicated to Bentley. We will be speaking today with his great-great-grandniece, Sue Richardson. Hopefully she can explain why her uncle chose to work for so long in obscurity.
He was a shy and humble man, and I think the reason that he didn't start writing for a number of years was because he felt that with the lack of formal education, that he didn't have anything to share that probably some professor at some big college somewhere in the world didn't already know.
But at the age of 32, 13 years after he had taken his first photo, Wilson decided that perhaps it was time to share his work. He packed up some of his photographs, left the farmhouse, and boarded a train from Jericho to Burlington. His destination, the University of Vermont.
I think it was the dream that at some point in time, he would be able to share this with the world. People would recognize it. He'd been doing this for so long, and he thought, somebody should know about this. Somebody needs to see these. I want to share these. So it just made sense, the university.
At UVM, Bentley connects with George Perkins, who had just been made dean of the Natural Science Department. Perkins sees the value in Wilson's work, and the two co-author a paper together. It is titled A Study of Snow Crystals. It is published in May 1898 in Popular Science Monthly. From there, Wilson began what has been described as his most prolific phase. For 10 years, he produced papers, articles, developed theories, and new techniques for meteorology. Perhaps Bentley's most famous observation was that no two snowflakes were alike. However, the scientific community largely ignored his work during this period. Sue Richardson believes it may have been due to his writing style.
Scientific writings are very dry. They're very just factual. And Willie had a poetic side to him. He had the mind of a scientist and the soul of a poet. And you see it in his writings.
There is no surer road to fairyland than that which leads to the observation of snow forms. To such a student, the winter storm is no longer a gloomy phenomenon to be dreaded. Even a blizzard becomes a source of keenest enjoyment and satisfaction, as it brings to him the dark, surging ocean of clouds, forms that thrill his eager soul with pleasure.
The words that he uses to describe the beauty in these and the intricacy of the designs, that's just a no-no. You don't introduce that kind of verbiage in a scientific article.
After 10 years of writing and submitting his articles to various publications, Wilson's output began to slow. He had given it his all. He had dedicated most of his life to this pursuit. But there was seemingly little interest.
He used to travel around with his projector and doing slideshows for churches and schools and different groups, and he offered to do one here in Jericho, thinking that maybe if people saw what he saw, the beauty he saw in the snow crystals, that maybe they would come to understand. And it was a beautiful summer evening. It was free, and only 6 people showed up. And he was heartbroken.
That very well could have been the end of the Wilson Bentley story, but as the Roaring Twenties arrive, Bentley's fortunes begin to change.
He started getting requests for copies of his prints, copies of his slides, and from colleges and universities. Even Tiffany's, the New York jeweler, bought a set for jewelry design. So more people beyond the scientific community started to hear about his work as well.
Bentley's star was rising. The New York Times ran 3 of his articles during this period. But what had changed? Why was there a sudden interest in Bentley's work? We're at UVM to speak with Professor Donna Brown, an expert on Vermont history.
I think that there was an increased appetite for Wilson Bentley's work in the 20s for a series of reasons, one of which was the rising interest in Vermont generally, and that's kind of folded in with the rising interest in winter. As everything else is growing so quickly and as there's so much urbanization and population change and industrialization, there's an equal and opposite interest in the direction of experiencing a nostalgic sense of the past.
Professor Brown also pointed out that a seismic political event in 1923 had increased the public's interest in Vermont.
The moment of Coolidge's swearing in, which happened really suddenly because of the death of the previous president, it takes place at his father's farm in Plymouth Notch, and it's very much something that really caught people's imaginations, that this president would come out of this very, very rural, really backward-looking setting. That really lit people's attention toward Vermont and toward rural life and toward the sort of the eternal verities and the traditional values and those kinds of things that then are starting to get some traction. I think that the reason you would see a place like the New York Times picking up a story about Wilson Bentley is because it fits already their notions about what Vermonters are like. He's a rural guy, he's quirky, he's got this attraction to science, but he's self-taught. He's very much a sort of man of the people from the standpoint of urban, intelligentsia in New York. He's very much a kind of quaint Yankee stereotype that they would find amusing and also admirable.
Whether by intention or accident, Bentley takes full advantage of this moment. Publishing articles in the New York Times and National Geographic, this shrewd shift in strategy meant now his writing was reaching an audience perhaps more suited to his poetic and whimsical prose. As his celebrity grew, the scientific community began to take notice.
He was invited to lecture. He went to Boston and to Philadelphia and to Buffalo and to Canada. And he loved talking about this and educating people and just sharing it with the world. That was always, from the very beginning, his dream and his passion. He wanted everybody to see what he saw.
Wilson's celebrity reached its apex when a group of backers funded the publishing of a book of his work.
He spent a lot of time selecting about 2,000 of his best images, and it took him a long time to put that all together. And then finally in early 1931, he had everything complete, and it went to the publisher, and he received his copies of it, 3 copies, right around Thanksgiving of 1931. And it was truly, nobody knows for sure how he felt, but I can only imagine how incredibly excited and just satisfied that he had to be at that time, seeing his life's work there in this beautiful volume. And it is spectacular. People were just absolutely spellbound by it because it's such an incredibly beautiful format with the black pages and the white snowflakes on. Sadly, he didn't live to see that success.
In his detailed logs, kept for many years, Wilson Bentley's final entry reads,
Cold north wind afternoon. Snow flying.
I believe it was the 7th of December. And again, this book had just come out at Thanksgiving. It had been a winter with virtually no snow. There hadn't been a single snowstorm. It had been warmer than usual. And he had gone into Burlington from Richmond on the train, as he often did. And he returned that afternoon, and it had started snowing. So by the time he got to Richmond, it was still about a 7-mile walk to the house. He took off walking towards home because he had to get home because it was snowing. And he hadn't photographed a single snow crystal that season. So that snowstorm turned into a blizzard. And by the time he got home, he was soaked clear through, chilled to the bone, and he developed not only a cold, but it turned into pneumonia. And he died on December 23rd, just a month after his life's work came to fruition. And it was his passion that actually was what caused his death, because his determination to get home in that storm, to photograph whatever the storm had to offer.
Today, Wilson Bentley is known the world over. Most recently, the National History Museum in London showcased his work after diligently digitizing a large collection of his photographs.
I find it extraordinary because it was 91 years ago, December, that he passed away. And I just am sometimes amazed that people, as you said, still are intrigued by his work and fascinated by his work and interested in his work. And I think that's it's a tribute to just the beauty that's in the world around us, that people still, in our crazy, fast-paced world, still appreciate that and take the time to stop and see that and appreciate nature.
Wilson Bentley transformed himself from citizen scientist to celebrity scientist. After much struggle, in the end, he fulfilled his lifelong dream to share his passion for the beauty of nature with the world. In Jericho, Vermont, I'm Ben Willis with Across the Fence.